Tucker Carlson, he goes to the Soviet Union. Well, I think it's a moment of rare honesty, but there's a lot more to it. Putin's narrative, he conveniently omits the strategic deception behind the collapse of the Soviet Union.
But you know what he failed to mention, Troy? He failed to talk about Stalin killing over 20 million Ukrainians in that forced famine.
That was that post World War II, right? Yeah.
He took all their food, literally took all their food, everything. He emptied the cupboards so that they would starve to death. And I tell you, that's why Ukrainians hate Russians. And he failed to mention that.
All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of The Last Dispensation. You're living in it. I am your host, Troy. And once again, thank you so much, Joel, for coming back to the program. Before we get started, I would like to briefly introduce you a little differently this time. In 2024, as of now, Joel Skousen, an American author known for his work on survivalism and geopolitical analysis, is discussing a range of topics that include international affairs, economic trends, and geopolitics. His discussions are particularly focused on the potential for global conflict and the strategic considerations that individuals and nations should take into account. Brother Skousen has expressed concerns about the possibility of China invading Taiwan and the global implications of such an event. He questions the reliability of the United States as an ally and highlights the uncertainty surrounding the number of nuclear warheads China possesses, which he believes downplays the threat posed by China. Skousen also discusses the potential for a nuclear war and the role of globalists in pushing towards a militarized global government. He has been critical of Bitcoin, suggesting that it may not be a safe investment if the internet goes down during a war situation. Amongst other things, you have the World Affairs Brief, which I am looking at now. That is a commentary on insights on a troubled world. And once again, like I asked you before, how much is that?
It's $48 a year or $5 a month, or so. People do that to support my work. I know people are interested in getting everything free on the internet, but some of us do require some support.
Well, you'd be surprised. I think everybody's trying to get paid too right now. Okay, so welcome to the program. And you asked me before I hit record what we would be talking about. And I'm glad your response was, I was glad by your response. You said that this was important. Recently, Tucker Carlson went to Moscow to interview Vladimir Putin. And I have taken the time to put together some questions. That's right, Joel. I didn't just jump on here this time without any ammo. Sometimes I come on more prepared than others. This time I am more prepared. Let me start off by asking you this. So Tucker Carlson, he goes to the Soviet Union. Well, I think it's a moment of rare honesty, but there's a lot more to it. Putin's narrative, he conveniently omits the strategic deception behind the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviets did this to gain Western aid, trade, and technology, essentially to catch up in the economic and military arms race. And it worked, right?
That's what I wrote in the World Affairs Brief. That's correct.
Okay, that's right. So are you suggesting the West was duped? Here's my question. Were they duped into thinking communism was dead?
No, they were not. I've outlined in the March 3rd, 2023 World Affairs Brief the entire justification for my conclusion that they faked their own demise. Now, Putin even admitted that, which is the first time a Soviet or post-Soviet official has ever admitted that the Russian leadership, in fact, pulled the plug on the Soviet Union. It wasn't a spontaneous uprising, because obviously they had to give orders to Erich Honecker to let the Stasi stand down so that the students could protest without being arrested. Same thing with the KGB, had to stand down in order to let the students in Moscow protest on behalf of Yeltsin standing on that tank in Red Square rather than arrest the students. In fact, I even saw a documentary where the student said, the only thing we couldn't understand about this, where was the KGB? They've always been tailing us, and they were nowhere to be seen. So that was a stand down order. Now, if I could see it, certainly U.S. intelligence knew this and could see it. They could tell that the Gorbachev coup was a fake, that the KGB failed to capture Gorbachev in his undefended villa with only about 3 security guards. I mean, how believable is that? How believable is it that the heads of the Defense Department, the KGB and the GRU, fled for their lives? Nobody asked the question, who were they fleeing from, except me? You see, if you control all the levers of power, who do you flee from? You don't.
Right.
It was staged. So my point is this. They knew that they were faking it. But the reason they went along, which is your prime question, is because the globalists were still in the mode of building these two future enemies, Russia and China. I have talked before on your show about the fact that, it was Western capitalists that gave $20 million to the Bolsheviks to finance the revolution. The Russians gave the same, the British gave the same amount in Lend-Lease in World War II. Not only we gave them all, then we built truck factories, we built aircraft factories, we gave them aircraft and arms and ammunition. Even our washers and dryers and sewing machines that American women didn't have, we exported to the Soviet Union. And after it was over, in this building future enemies, we gave them the rest of the nuclear plans to weapons that they could not steal in the Manhattan Project. That happened when Major Racy Jordan was at a Montana Air Base and discovered these trunks full of nuclear weapons plants. And the White House called him and told him to let the Soviets have them. We gave them the first shipment of enriched uranium because they didn't know how to enrich uranium so they could explode their nuclear weapon, first one in 1949. We brought Mao Zedong to power in China by cutting off military aid to Chiang Kai-shek. We brought Castro to power by cutting off military aid to Batista. We brought the Sandinistas to power in Nicaragua by cutting off military aid to Somoza. We brought the Ayatollah Khomeini by, cutting back on the Shah of Iran. So here's the point. They were still in the mode of building an enemy. And why do they need an enemy? Because that's the only way to get the United States into a militarized global government is by having another third world war. World War II got us the UN, but it has no enforcement powers. They need a world government with military power, taxing power, police power. And that's what this next world war is intended to do. So because they were still in the mode of protecting Russia, they did all through the Cold War. That was containment, all it was all about. But it didn't contain Russia. It didn't stop Russia from arming North Vietnam. It didn't stop China from arming North Vietnam. It didn't stop China or Russia from putting in nuclear weapons or missiles into Cuba. It didn't stop them from infiltrating Hollywood and corrupting our American youth with all of the stuff that we've done. But it was given the impression that we were containing them. So they were still in that mode of building them. We rebuilt their entire oil industry. That's what made Russia the superpower in terms of oil production that it is to this day. We did it in the West. We built a whole new nuclear weapons refurbishment factory so that they could reprocess the uranium. They were supposed to sell it to us as nuclear fuel, but they locked our inspectors out after we built it so that they kept the warheads and gave us new nuclear fuel to sell. This is all part of the deception to prove that what Putin told Tucker Carlson, that we pulled down the Soviet Union in order to peacefully merge with the United States, and the West rejected it. That's what his message is. We did everything, but the West rejected us. Well, it's because the West knew that they'd actually failed. Now, they weren't going to blow the whistle on Russia. They weren't going to expose it because they were still in the building mode of helping Russia again. But they weren't about to let Russia join NATO and steal all the secrets, etc. And besides, Russia didn't remove any of the Soviet communists in all of those Soviet states. So when they joined NATO, they still had lots of spies, and we still have to this very day. Putin knows what's going on in NATO because of all the spies in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary that still exist, that never did get purged in the phony fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it almost feels like the old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," because we can't stand. Well, when I say we, I'm talking about those who love the Constitution, which I believe is also dead, like you do. But those who who are anti-globalist, do you feel like we're just too rash to think that Vladimir Putin and well, like you said before, it's not, communism isn't really dead there. That we're too rash to just grab them and embrace them and say, we believe everything you're saying, because we can't stand, because we are saturated so much with the Western globalist agenda.
No, right? That's right. That's why Ron Paul just came out and said, he applauded Viva Tucker Carlson because he applauded the fact that Russia isn't really our enemy. He bought hook, line, and sinker what Putin was saying. He's not really our enemy. And he also bought into the fact that the West provoked Putin by staging this coup in 2014 that took down a duly elected president. Well, as I've explained in my World Affairs brief, it wasn't a Western coup. Yes, they financed the protesters. But the communist president, Viktor Yanukovych, he's the one who stood down the Berkut. Remember, standing down the Stasi, standing down the KGB, standing down the Berkut, the riot police, so that the protesters could win, is a sure sign that this is not a Western coup. It's a communist coup to fake the West. And what it led to was a false nationalist, Petro Poroshenko, becoming president of Ukraine. And he, in turn, provoked the Russian people of the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, into feeling like they were persecuted. And that, in turn, justified Putin coming in with a stealth invasion of military troops in civilian clothes that then began to provoke the Ukrainian soldiers occupying the area so that he could now say, oh, the Ukrainian soldiers are killing civilians and doing all the things that justify the invasion that happened just recently. Mm-hmm. This is a very sophisticated series of complex conspiracies, and you've really got to understand how the Soviets are masters at playing both sides. And Putin was showing his masterful technique by regaling Tucker Carlson with a half an hour of one-sided, falsified Soviet history, talking about how Ukraine was an integral part of Russia, how 80% of Ukrainians speak Russian, how we've all lived together and, we're one people. That justified the invasion. But you know what he failed to mention, Troy? He failed to talk about Stalin killing over 20 million Ukrainians in that forced famine.
Mm-hmm. That was that post World War II, right? Yeah.
He took all their food, literally took all their food, everything. He emptied the cupboards so that they would starve to death. And I tell you, that's why Ukrainians hate Russians. And he failed to mention that. Don't you think that's an integral part of Russia-Ukraine history to talk about where the hatred developed?
Yeah.
I mean, it was very selective.
Well, because in the beginning of this Ukraine thing, which is going to lead to my next question, we didn't believe Putin was this great. I don't think Tucker believes he is not a dictator. Okay. But he kind of, like I said before we got on, deify. I use the word deify or the enemy
dictator. That's what he thinks.
Say it again.
Benign dictator.
Yes. Benign. Perfect. Yes. Right. And then leave out all the atrocities that we've ever experienced, that were experienced at the hands of the Soviet Union. How do you feel about Putin's comments on peace and cooperation with the West? Is that something that we should buy hook, line, and sinker.
Was central to his entire message. That's why he felt open enough to admit that the Russian leadership, as he said, effectively instigated the collapse of the Soviet Union, because he said it's all for a benign purpose, to have peace and cooperation with the West. But in fact, as I pointed out in last week's World Affairs Brief, which your readers can still get by going to worldaffairsbrief.com and clicking on Request a Sample. It'll get them that current brief until tomorrow, when the new brief will come out. But I took great pains to explain how his actions actually belied that. It's one thing to say, I asked Clinton if we could join NATO, and he talked to his advisors and came back and rejected me. He says, no, you can't. Well, in the first place, the whole purpose of NATO is to protect against the Soviet Union. So NATO really doesn't have a reason for existing if Russia...
That was the whole purpose of NATO, was anti-communism, or just
anti-Russia, because Russia was
not,
the new Cold
not just
War
China
enemy.
and Russia, but
No, it was anti-Russia. So Russia was the Cold War enemy, and NATO was all about deterring the Soviet Union from attacking. So if Russia really went away, why would you want to join NATO? There's no purpose of NATO if Russia isn't an enemy anymore. Of course, the U.S. couldn't explain that. When Putin said we offered to join a joint missile defense system, well, West wasn't going to share all of their technology. They had built Russia to a certain extent. But remember, right now, the globalists have switched sides, because now that World War III is getting close, and it can't happen with Putin just unilaterally nuking the West because of Ukraine, because he can't occupy after you nuke someone. If you can't occupy, you can't. They eventually rebuild and come back and get you.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, the point is, we're getting close to World War III, but that depends on China being ready to back Russia up, because China can occupy. It's got the million to do that. But the point is that the globalists have switched sides. Before war gets close, or as war gets close, they have to stop building these two enemies, lest they get blamed for this war. In fact, nobody remembers all the things that I just listed to you. You ask conservatives, did the West fund the Bolshevik Revolution? They say, of course not. Why would they do that? They just don't know conspiratorial history. Did the West bring Mao Zedong and the communists to power in China? They've forgotten. They don't remember anymore, you see. They don't remember that we gave Russia the miniature ball-bearing technology so that they could merge their missiles and have multiple warheads on a missile. They didn't have that before. We gave it to them under Henry Kissinger, a globalist who also brought China to power and gave him a seat on the UN with veto power.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Kissinger was an arch globalist, and he worked for a Republican president, Richard Nixon, who was ignorant of conspiracy theory.
You think Nixon was kind of like another Reagan, where he was just naive? The naivety was there.
Reagan was not as naive as Nixon.
Mm-hmm. But Nixon wasn't a globalist.
No, well, until after he got impeached.
Right.
He resigned. Then he just bent over backwards to please.
Whatever you want me to do, just don't cancel me.
Right. That's right. He was just so hungry for establishment recognition to get back in their good graces. He became a globalist afterwards. So you see, things are complex. People do change and work through things. But the important thing is, conservatives have to remember that I'm not saying the globalists are the good guys. I'm saying all three predator centers, Russia, China, and the Western globalists, are satanic-driven conspiracies. Satan promises each of them that they're going to win, but he doesn't let but one, and that he intends the Western globalists to win ultimately, because they're the most sophisticated form of conspiracy. They at least let you think that you are going to be free under their version of, AI robotic society. Yeah. Whereas everybody senses that China will be absolutely ruthless in their version of the New World Order. And Russia historically has always been ruthless towards American prisoners of war and other people that get into the Soviet gulags. Nobody wants to live under those two versions of communism.
I know I don't. Who does? Well, and that's how God punishes the wicked. We read it in the Book of Mormon. We read it in the Bible. The wicked punish the wicked, right? That's what Satan does. He can only use one or two guys. He can't use all of, well, he uses all of them, but he sits back and he laughs when they're all taking each other out because he just continues his web of lies and deceit. And you said it yourself. The goal isn't just regional dominance, right? It's about reshaping a global order. It's bringing in a satanic agenda that Satan wants to. Do you think, here's an abstract question, Joel. Do you think Satan thinks he's going to win?
Oh, yes, he does. Remember, he is winning a great deal in terms of people and their corruption. I mean, the majority of the world is corrupt right now. And in the United States and the West, it's extremely corrupt with this. I mean, you look at how many establishment leaders have bought into this LGBTQ tolerance agenda. And not only tolerance, just literally railing on people. You see it in KSL News every night here in the West, where they talk about this poor state school board member who made a mistake in a tweet about what she thought was a transgender man being a girl in sports and turned out to be wrong. And boy, they have just crucified this poor woman, even though she's apologized. We won't hear of it. You've got to resign, But,
right.
the world is just bending over backwards with tolerance, excessive tolerance for these aberrations of the mind, which often are satanic induced, just like suicide is. And by playing up to that and giving it legitimacy, even in the church, it's going to be a real problem that's going to come back and bite us.
Okay, so that leads me to this. With all of these complex, I would say this is a complex web of strategies and deceptions. So how does the average person make sense of all of these geopolitical moves in Ukraine? What does that have to do with what Tucker was talking about? One thing I like about your ideas and the way you approach things is you can't be biased. You can't be extremely biased on this. Two bad guys can be fighting each other, right? And we tend to forget one isn't always just 100% good. This is going back to Satan using two people to do that. So there's two questions here. One is, how do we make sense of this these geopolitical moves as an average person with Ukraine? And is Tucker Carlson psyops?
How do you make sense of this? Well, you see, the advantage I have is that I'm probably the top expert in the world on conspiracy. So I know the history going way, way back, clear past to their original origin in the modern times in the last century. And you don't get that kind of education. You don't get that education by reading just one book. You got to read them all. And, you've got the book by G. Edward Griffin on the establishment of the Federal Reserve, which was a conspiracy. You've got this falsified passing an amendment of the income tax. That was a conspiracy. You've got bringing Woodrow Wilson to power. That was a conspiracy with an unknowing former President Theodore Roosevelt, who was put in to try to siphon votes off from Robert Taft. These conspiracies go way, way back, and you start to see a pattern. In fact, Woodrow Wilson said at the end of his term, he said, there is a power so secret within government that I dare not speak about it outside of this thing. He saw it in operation. But see, they were blackmailing him over his affair with another woman as a professor at the university. And so that's how they kept him under control. We see the same control under Roberts. I mean, you have to know conspiratorial history to know the Trump mistakes, how he picked Brett Kavanaugh to be a member of the Supreme Court. Now, sure.
And Nikki Haley.
And, well, he didn't. Yeah, he picked her for the UN. It's true. But you see, she hadn't shown her globalist colors yet. She was certainly mainstream. But you see, Trump couldn't tell that Christopher Wray was deep state, just like, FBI Director Comey. And I could tell because I know conspiratorial history. I know that Wray, as well as Mueller and Comey, were all involved in the 9/11 cover-up, which was a deep state operation from beginning to end. Brett Kavanaugh was a deep stater because he was second in command to Ken Starr in the cover-up of the Vince Foster murder trial. And you see, you got to know these details. And so how do you do that? Well, unless you want to get into my head, which you can do by reading the World Affairs Brief. And by the way, all the archives.
It's a beautiful thing. I like how you gather everything together and deliver it in a package.
And they're searchable. The archives are searchable. You can go back and talk about things clear back to the year 2000, and, hundreds of thousands of reading hour. But what I'm saying is that if you don't have that kind of knowledge, you need to tie into somebody who does. And that's the service that I offer to people.
Well, and then we do have to be careful about there are untrue conspiracies, right?
Absolutely.
Like lizard people and, flat earth or whatever. I still don't think we went to the moon, but I don't know how you feel about that.
That's a very controversial subject, and there's a lot of evidence for that it was falsified. A lot of evidence, and I haven't reached an absolute opinion there, but I'll tell you, it's pretty difficult to debunk the things that they have shown that could not have happened on the moon. Well, and the fact that we haven't gone back there in 50 years.
What the heck? We're trying to go to Mars. What? Wait, we're just going to take a trip. It's like saving all your money to go to Tahiti. And then you go there for 5 minutes and go, okay, let's go to Puerto Rico. Wait a minute. We spent 50 years getting over to Tahiti. Right? Okay. Let me switch gears here is Tucker Carlson on our side or what?
Well, no, Tucker Carlson is, and I like the guy personally, despite the fact that he uses the F word, every other word in private.
Yeah.
Which shows a bit of a corrupt conscience. In other words, when a person doesn't feel the nervous feelings about using foul language and other types of things, and, you can't trust their, like Donald Trump. He doesn't have a very good conscience about morality, and so he does make mistakes, and he gets denied information that a good conscience gets about nervous feelings about picking a Christopher Wray to be FBI director. So I don't have confidence in Donald Trump being able to drain the swamp. He doesn't have the conspiratorial knowledge to do that. Tucker Carlson is really ignorant of conspiracy. He didn't know any of the facts.
He didn't.
To counter Putin, he furrowed his brow. He was just concerned about that. And then he didn't counter anything. He asked a few tepid questions, and Putin expertly just wove it right back to the agenda that he had pre-prepared for, which Tucker bought hook, line, and sinker.
And you can tell when
the trouble is now that the establishment is ignorantly calling him a traitor and persecuting him about this. It's driven him more to the defensive so that he keeps promoting the propaganda that he bought into Putin. He isn't trying to discern what the errors were that he made in buying into that. He hasn't read my brief. He hasn't read even the Daily Mail, which published a piece by Andrew Neil of the UK pointing out all the historical errors that Putin made in his speech. And that was very good non-conspiratorial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But Tucker is all too confident, I'm afraid, that he's on a roll, and it's just not working.
Okay, I want to switch gears here just for a second here. I get asked this a lot, and I finally have an opportunity to ask you, what do you think about Julian Assange? What comes to your mind? And Edward Snowden. A lot of people get them confused. They are not the same people. Go ahead.
Well, both of these people revealed things. I mean, Julian Assange got a leak and a lot of those leaks were from various government insiders who dared to leak out some of the classified information to them. He was accused, of course, of revealing sources and getting people killed. None of that is true. He carefully made sure that none of those things naming actual named intelligence sources were revealed in the WikiLeaks things. But he did a great service by implementing or exposing a lot of the illegal acts that the government has been doing over the years in terms of invading and interfering with other elections and things and making the deep state look very, very bad. And that's why they went after him. And it's been a relentless campaign. Now, Julian Assange is not a moral man. He's had his immorality problems like a lot of people, but he's absolutely justified in releasing, because you see, the government has no lawful authority to hide illegal acts under the guise of national security. That's illegal according to federal law. You can't do it, but they disregard that all the time. And they control enough judges and prosecutors that they never get prosecuted in the first place because it never leaks out until someone like Julian. So somebody could actually prosecute the government for what Julian Assange has leaked out, and that's why they have to get after him. He will never see the light of day, in my opinion. Now,
that's sad. And do you feel that's Snowden, unconstitutional?
And the government of the UK has been totally complicit with the US. In fact, Ecuador betrayed Julian Assange, who was in their embassy for many years when a Marxist got elected president and promptly betrayed him to the deep state. And now Ecuador is under severe attack by their own drug cartels and under military attack. And so Ecuador's paying the price for a lot of things that they've done in the past. Now Edward Snowden, of course, was very, very patriotic and revealing the same thing, only he was revealing the domestic spying agenda of the NSA and others, of which he worked for Booz Allen, who was a contractor for the NSA. And he had to flee to Russia after being aware that he would never get a fair trial in the United States. And even Donald Trump wouldn't pardon these two people.
I thought in 2020 he was going to pardon Assange.
Then he
Trump
got talked out of it.
But he got bullied out of doing that by the rhinos, maybe. I don't know.
Well, the deep state has their clutches on a lot of Republicans as well as most Democrats. And so most everyone who gets to the hierarchy, the Republican Party is controlled.
Yeah, crazy. Well, has anything ever happened like that before? That's what I wanted to ask you. Is that something unprecedented going on with Julian Assange? And well, Edward Snowden, I guess we could say he's just a traitor to his country, right? No, not us, but that's what they're saying. They're calling him a traitor.
Well, yeah, that's what they're calling him. But, he was actually doing a very patriotic duty. It was wrong. It was illegal to the NSA to do domestic spying, and he showed that they were spying on everything. So these are people who need to be thanked and rewarded for being heroes.
Absolutely.
And I am just very upset that Donald Trump failed to pardon a lot of good people. There are a lot of people who are organic farmers that the FDA has gone after for selling raw milk to a willing client who knows the risk, et cetera. I mean, these are things that are fundamental rights to be able to engage in economic commerce with anybody that you're willing, no fraud involved. And he failed to pardon those people. He failed to pardon Snowden. He failed to pardon Julian Assange.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for answering that. Let's go to election 2024. What do you think? What's going to happen? Are we going to see? Do you think there was cheating last time?
Well, absolutely. And I'm, in the World Affairs Brief, probably the only one that put together all of the evidence of cheating, and none of that got to Donald Trump's attorneys. None of it. They didn't produce any quantitative evidence of the vote being stolen, and I did in the World Affairs Brief. So I outlined, for example, the hack into the Edison Research computers, which they compile all of the state election results and feed it to all the news networks. So everything you see on TV comes from Edison Research. It's a foreign-owned company. Mm-hmm. Someone hacked into their database.
Like Argentina or Bolivia, or I don't know. Somewhere. Spain. Okay. I thought it was from South America for some reason.
In any case, it documented exactly how many votes were flipped from Biden, how many hundreds of thousands of votes were flipped from from Trump to Biden, how many hundreds of thousands of votes were actually disappeared for Donald Trump that came in for Donald Trump, You could see the registry, and they weren't added to his column. They just were disappeared. And then there was the postal evidence, which was shown graphically. You see, the interesting thing about a mailing ballot system is that even in Democratic cities, those ballots, which were going to be mostly for Biden, get shuffled with all the mail coming in from outside the main city to these big central post offices. And so you end up with a constant relationship between Biden versus Trump. And right up until the wee hours of the morning of the day of the election, Trump was steadily always a little bit ahead of Biden. And then all of a sudden, in all the swing states, including Virginia, which was never called as a swing state, you had this big jump of ballots where suddenly Biden got thousands more ballots. And then the ratio was continuing. Trump at the same, and Biden now above, stayed even with Trump, but ahead of him. Mm-hmm. And that proved ballot insertion that was not from the post office. Because remember, if it comes through the post office, it gets shuffled, and that ratio is maintained. Those ballots came in truckloads to like the State Farm Arena in Georgia, where they put all those ballots into the thing. And every one of those swing states had ballot drops by the truckload come in the wee hours of the morning after they'd shut down counting and told the Republican poll watchers to go home. So yes, there's no doubt in my mind that it was stolen. And let me tell you, it had nothing to do with Dominion per se. It wasn't them programming. All you have to do in any election computer. Now, there are programs that flip votes in computers where you vote for Trump and it'll flip to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election or flip to Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And they always say that's a program. No, that's not a programming error. Programming error does only one thing, unless you programming it to every so-and-so flip that ballot.
Well, and even the poll challengers locked out. You know, that was...
Well, no, they didn't walk out.
Locked out. I said locked out. They were locked out, right?
No, actually, most of the people who were organizing poll watchers were told not to do it anymore in the 2020 election. And that's how you tell when vote fraud is occurring, because poll watchers record people as they're coming out of the polls, and it's very accurate polling. And they didn't want those poll watchers because it would have disputed the results.
Right.
So there was behind the scenes pressure on the people, mostly university students, and universities are very capable of being coerced by powerful influencing forces. So that's how the poll watchers, it wasn't made illegal. They were just told, we're not going to do this anymore.
So it's going to happen again, I'm sure.
Look, the computers are still going to be connected to the internet. There's no way it'll be more sophisticated. We probably won't have the benefit of anyone being able to hack into Edison research computers this time. And so it's going to happen all over again. And it's going to be even easier because of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. involved in the race. Now it's a three-way race, and it's going to be very easy since they're all pushing this thing that he's taking more from Trump than he is from Biden. It will make it easy for Trump to lose this time. There'll be no way to trace it. So count on it. I'll guarantee you 100% Trump will not be the next president of this United States.
No, I don't think so either. But then it comes now, but here, on the flip side of everything, or not the flip side, but the other debacle is Biden. Is he of sound mind? Can he last another 4 years? Do they even care if he's going to last another 4 years? Maybe they have a vice president that they're really counting on that's going to be president. Can he be, maybe he'll be shoot in there so that he can be removed and then somebody else step up. I don't know. What say you?
Well, he clearly is senile. The special counsel, who basically said, he's not competent to stand trial, and yet he's competent to run for the president of the United States. I mean, that's the big issue. Even a lot of the Democrats are starting to turn on Biden, but they keep defending him as well. And the media keeps trying to downplay this story, but it's very, very big. It's either one or two things. Either they plan on replacing him at the last minute during the Democratic convention in August, or they're simply going to continue to thumb their nose at the American people and say, we could put a dead corpse in as president because we have that kind of power.
Well, because it's obvious he's not running anything.
No, he's not running anything. Even Carlson admitted that. Of course, he said the government is incompetent, which is not, is doing evil, stupid things because they're doing it on purpose, like the leaving the border wide open.
Well, they literally have to tell him when they're going to. They literally. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to add this. They literally have to tell him when all he cares about. When are we going to go get ice cream yet? Is it time, to go to bed? Can I watch this program? He's just not there, and he reads from a teleprompter.
And then he suddenly gets lost, even with the teleprompter in front of him. They have to move him off the stage. You're done now. Come on, walk with me. I mean, this is just a joke, and the whole world knows it. When Tucker Carlson said that he was senile and said, if there was a boxing match, the doctor would have to step in and call the fight, because he's just not capable of continuing. I was shocked when they ran him for president the first time, especially as they didn't even campaign, just stayed in his basement. But Kamala Harris is also a frazzle head brain that runs off at the mouth, doesn't know when to stop talking, and cackles like a witch.
Right.
I mean,
well, some people have wondered if she's playing dumb, like that's some kind of act to.
No, she's not playing. No.
Okay.
You can tell people that have no mental self-control to shut off their brain. They're not playing an act. Those people are actually, and she's an immoral woman who's slept her way up to the top.
Yeah.
She's just as much as a puppet as
well, it's not an act for me. I really am dumb, guys, believe it or not. Hey, okay. So, well, you've got like 15 minutes left because I want to talk about war, of course, and also, or what's on your mind, Joel? What would you like to talk about? Or did we cover it already?
The main topic I wanted to cover up is this fact that conservatives they're just really being led astray. And I am most disturbed about this because they should be able to feel nervous in their conscience about this entire thing, about Putin being a good guy. But conservatives have this black and white type of feeling that it's got to be either good or bad. And they just they aren't aware enough that they're all bad. There are no leaders of any nation that are good anymore. None. Virtue does not exist in the leadership around the world. And what really disturbs me, though, is the fact that conservatives can't feel it. They are literally on a roll. And a lot of it's because of their leaders. Ron Paul just came out, and Pastor Chuck Baldwin just came out applauding Tucker to the moon and saying that, repeating all the old mantras that, the globalists we're going to put Ukraine as a member of NATO on Russia's border, and Tucker said, and move nukes right next to Russia. Well, that's a stupid statement to make. In the first place, nukes are international. You don't have to move them close to any border to threaten someone with nukes. You don't have to move them anywhere. And Putin already has a NATO state, the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, on his border. There are no nukes in those states. So having Ukraine as a member of NATO does not mean that it's a red line that means you're threatening me with nuclear war, that you're going to put nuclear warheads on our border. Nuclear warheads are delivered by long-range bombers from the U.S. or from Germany or from missiles, and they don't have to be moved to borders. So, and then Ron Paul repeated the thing about overthrowing a legitimate president, happened to be a communist president in Ukraine in 2014, and it wasn't true. Only I am the only one in this entire world that has ever exposed the fact that it was a Russian coup, because of the fact that the Berkut was told to stand down. It was even on Wikipedia that the Berkut stood down, and then it was removed, probably because somebody was reading my stuff and decided we got to remove that so that nobody else knows that. But that's how deep this conspiracy runs and how much the deep state controls Wikipedia. That doesn't mean everything in Wikipedia is a lie, But on crucial aspects of conspiracy, you'll never find the truth in Wikipedia.
Well, you mentioned leaders not being integrity gone. Book of Mormon talks about it. Helaman. Remember the Book of Helaman describes a period where the Nephite society was plagued by that, by widespread corruption. And it's materializing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that even conservative leaders are corrupt. When I went to Washington in 1980 through 84 during the Reagan administration to be head of the Conservative National Committee, I was shocked, frankly, and how some of the two biggest congressmen, that were there, conservatives, were immoral and were living with a mistress in Washington. And, you find Matt Gaetz is not a moral person. He's one of the champions of the Freedom Caucus. I won't name all the people, but, some of these people are just pretty flagrant in their disregarding the moral commandments. But they are conservative, and we have to depend on them to hold the line on liberty. But they don't make good decisions ultimately. They make mistakes because their conscience is corrupted by their immorality.
Who should we keep an eye on as far as geopolitically when it comes to war, nuclear war, the threat of...
They're all blind. There's nobody warning of war.
Right now.
And they'll eventually all get on the bandwagon when it's already too late to stop. But you'll find everybody getting on the bandwagon. But, the world goes around on its merry way. People aren't concerned with war. People do think that China's a problem when you ask them. But are they concerned about it? No. Why? Because the media isn't concerned about it. When the media starts to hit the war drums, people will start to get worried, and then it's too late to prepare.
So it does feel like the things have died down the last couple of weeks, maybe the last month, as far as blowing the trumpet for war.
Well, and that's because we have become all too dependent on listening to the newsmakers or the leaders. Even in the church, we have a problem of follow the leader. And it makes people lazy. As long as I'm listening to what the prophet says, I should have no worries. And that's just not true.
Right. Anything else, Joel, that we've missed as far as, like Israel? What's going on there?
Well, Israel is the unsolvable situation. Hamas is an inveterate terrorist organization, never will stop being. You can kill all of Hamas, but they've infected enough of their underlings that new leaders will rise. They'll always be. And Israel is run by a globalist, Benjamin Netanyahu, who believes in conflict creation. Israel, for example, helped train most of the leaders that became ISIS. ISIS was a creation of the U.S. deep state. They invaded Libya and destroyed that very prosperous country, one of the wealthiest countries in Africa, under Gaddafi, who was sharing his oil revenue with the people quite generously. They destroyed that, and as well as in Tunisia, to create a wave of Islamic jihadists that they could import to Syria, which they did. It wasn't a civil war in Syria. Yes, there was some opposition in Syria, but they augmented that by about 10 times by shipping in Islamic jihadists from Libya and Tunisia. And then they took about half of those, and the story is rather long about why they couldn't take down Syria because of their supposed chemical weapons threat. But in any case, they separated about half of the jihadists that they had imported and called them ISIS. They gave them a name change, and they gave them priority and funding and sent them off on a rampage through Iraq to gin up this war on terror. But it was a total deep state creation. All the weapons were provided through underground arms dealers by the CIA, and it was a terrible... but the Israelis, you see, ended up training most of those Arabs. The Israelis are the very best about getting spies into other countries. They have spies in every single other Muslim country, including Iran. So they know what's going on inside there. And they also trained and created the terrorist leaders that led ISIS. And that's why the U.S. would come in and rescue those leaders in the Battle of Mosul and the Battle of Raqqa, et cetera. They had to save those people that knew the secrets about the U.S. deep state support for ISIS. And Israel would do all the medical care. When you have ISIS warriors that were wounded, they'd get shipped to Israel. And ISIS would sell all their oil into to Turkey, who would resell it to Israel. That was ISIS oil they were stealing from Syria, in northern Syria. So you see, this was in a very deep incestuous relationship between the U.S. deep state and ISIS,
right,
and Turkey and Israel. So Israel is not a good country either. That doesn't mean there aren't innocent Israelis, and there are innocent Palestinians. But unfortunately, when you are indoctrinated, as the Palestinians are, with hate from the time they are in kindergarten, you're never going to have peace. Even if you give them a two-state solution, meaning give them an independent state, they will arm even faster and more deadly, as the Hezbollah has done in Lebanon, where they're free to import arms from Iran, and the same with the Houthis in Yemen, which they're free to import arms from Iran.
yeah,
Now, Iran is not a good country either, even though there's a fairly sizable minority in Iran that are pro-Western and really don't like the Ayatollahs and their ruthless control over people in Iran. But Iran is another one of those evil nations that are defensively preparing with nuclear weapons because they know the globalists are out to get them. The globalists can't stand having a Muslim nation like Iran being self-sufficient in armament. That's why Iran has to go. But in the meantime, I'm not saying Iran's a good. None of these people are good. It's just
right.
evil.
No, like it goes back to Ukraine and Ukraine, Russia, Western globalism. None of these people are good.
When the Soviets faked their own demise, they never pulled out any of the communist spies or the communist cadres in all of the former Soviet states, nor in Ukraine. That's why there's so much corruption in Ukraine. And that's why there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. You have Soviet agents in there putting on Nazi symbols and doing weird things to give Putin an excuse to come in and take care of these Nazis.
You see, guys, it's gone. We crush few people. It's gone. No more Soviet. No, you got to bomb the whole house when you get rid of the cockroaches, right? And they didn't bomb, when you see those tents over the houses.
Well, at least you have to purge the government from the former communists so that you don't have them in the bureaucracy. You see, the proof that the communists are still there is the Ukrainians complain, I still have to pay the same bribes to the bureaucrats in Ukraine as I did when they were communists. Same thing in Hungary, same thing in Poland, same thing in Czechoslovakia. So, these are illusions that we're dealing with, illusions of the phony fall to put people to sleep. I am just so distraught that the conservatives have bought into this. That's my main worry. They don't seem to have the sensitivity of conscience to feel that there's a rat in this story. And, it doesn't take much to convince blind people who are naive or like Tucker Carlson when you don't have the background to see through this type of stuff.
No, he was a liberal class. He was a classic liberal. He still is, kind of, which I would welcome a classic liberal before I'd welcome a leftist. But at least they were Constitution loving.
He's very negative against capitalism. He doesn't really understand free markets quite a bit. So, you ever seen him give a rant against free markets and capitalism?
Well, I do agree with him about I think isn't he kind of more against monopolizing,
Well, but you see, he doesn't understand the difference between crony capitalism that we have in the United States. It's in
robber baron capitalism.
Crony capitalism, which, is very sophisticated. The military-industrial complex is all about crony capitalism, and distinguishing that from true free market capitalism, which is absolutely the best thing for humanity, even though it will never lead to equality of results.
Yeah, that's true.
Because
okay, you've got
upon true worth. Yeah.
Right, you got 5 minutes left. Here's what I want to end with. So you've got little conflicts in 2024. You got Venezuela's threat with Guyana, the Subsia, am I pronouncing that right? Subsia sabotage off Ireland's coast. Myanmar, sorry. The Myanmar, I'm going to cut that out, Joel. See, I don't want to look that dumb. Myanmar conflict spill over into China. And, just little stuff going on. What I found interesting was when Vladimir Putin meets with Kim Jong-un. Should we be worried about that? Is North Korea really a threat?
Oh, yes. North Korea is a big threat. In fact,
and should we worry about that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. But not as an independent threat. Remember, North Korea used to be a complete puppet state of Russia. But then China, once they started to help out.
Really? I thought it was China the whole time.
No. It started
It
out
wasn't.
as a puppet from Russia. That's right. And during the Korean War, it was both Russia and China that were assisting. For example, every tactical move that the U.S. made had to go through the UN military headquarters, which was always staffed by a Russian general. So that means anytime MacArthur wanted to do anything, he had to get approval through a Russian general who would relay that, of course, to North Korea. So they knew, except for the Incheon landing. MacArthur refused to tell the UN he was going to do the Incheon landing.
So did Russia fund a lot of Kim Jong-un's grandpa during that?
Yes, absolutely. But eventually China has taken over the control. Now North Korea is currently a 100% puppet state of Red China.
But why did China take over? Why didn't Russia?
Because Russia,
the collapse.
Well, but Russia increasingly had financial difficulties because of their communist system, and could no longer continue to arm and sustain all of these different things. That's why one of the reasons for the collapse is that they wanted the West to take over, rebuilding those countries, even though they still had their spies in there. I mean, It was a win-win for Russia. We still get to spy on the West because now they're members of NATO, and yet they are built up and rejuvenated by Russia. Very slick stuff going on. But China is the controller now of Kim Jong-un, was of his father as well. They don't do anything without China. And
so it's always been a puppet regime then?
Always, but China is now giving all the technology. Remember, Chinese technology is now surpassing Russia in some respects. And Russia is no longer sharing their high-tech technology with China. China's having to do it independent because Russia fears that China will eventually duke it out with them for control of the New World Order after they win this next war, which I don't think they will win. I think Russia will go down in this next war if we survive at all.
Okay. So just quick, I don't know if you know this, but so before the Korean War, was it just Korea just was minding its own business, and here comes Russia and says, hey, let's experiment with this little country and see if we can get the Americans to come over? Or was it's not Kim Jong-il? What was the grandpa's name? I can't remember.
I can't
remember. Was that Korea's idea?
Well, but look, Korea was occupied by the Japanese. That was the problem, is that the Japanese were the hated enemy of the thing. And the Soviets then built up North Korea to expel the Japanese, and that happened. And then it morphed into a battle with South Korea.
Okay.
But you see, Russia was no position to come in and invade on behalf of North Korea, but the Chinese were right there at the border, and Chinese wanted to do that to establish their influence over North Korea.
Interesting. Post-World War stuff, and then we go from there. Thank you so much, Joel.
My pleasure.
Always come back again and smart me. Put some smarts in this head.
We'll see you next month.
All right. Bye-bye.